Alrighty, everybody, just give me a minute to get myself organized here. Okay. I just, I cannot help but comment. Zoom are the funniest folks on the planet. Good morning, Amy. They push these updates out. They don't tell you they're doing updates. They're mostly cosmetic. Clearly they're moving to a touch kind of interface, that pretty much everyone who builds software like this is doing. And it's just so silly because they constantly break their own code. And there's just, having come from software development, I know exactly what's wrong. There's no project manager, sitting atop of the thing and saying, okay, no, we're not doing that. Yes, that works. Who tested? There's just nobody doing that. They're just randomly pushing out updates. Okay. So, oh, great. We got a good turnout right out the gate. I'm happy to see that. All right. There should be virtually nothing on your main screen that I'm sharing except my desktop. I want to just remind you that this thing is out there. The log that I told you that some people have used, that I've mentored for going through combines, and it's just really a useful little tool. That approach, we're going to come back to that a little bit, but I just wanted to mention that. And then the primary thing we're going to talk about today is going to be this: setups by time of day. I will come back to that in just a minute because I don't want you too focused on that yet, because I have some housekeeping to do. Yeah, this is going to be a really good workshop if you pay attention and you ask questions. If you're still in and there's still a couple of people that, they're getting a lot out of this, they get where I'm coming from, but they're still not taking seriously how important this stuff is, like this thing here, and like the document that we're going to spend most of our time on, that one. Some of you, oh yeah, I can see that's a good idea, but then you'll post a comment about something you're struggling with. Say the transitions from scalping to looking for intraday swing trades, which is one of the toughest things to do if you trade both. Well, here's a really good methodology to deal with that. And I've talked about this kind of stuff a lot. I haven't really given you a direct example, so that's what we're going to do. But before we do that, and I'm glad so many people showed up live for this. This is great. This is half the group, by the way. And most of the people that don't come when I really make an emphasis of it have some other commitment that they can't get around. So that's cool. That's a decent turnout. All right. So 4 things I want to cover before we get into the playbook time of day kind of stuff. I don't have any slide or anything for this, so just listen. If you have questions or need to be unmuted, I will do that. Post the questions in the chat. Until that point. All right, so a couple of topics. Number 1, and many of you have discussed this with me privately. There's been a little discussion publicly in the group on Slack. What happens after this workshop ends at the end of this month, the beginning of the month on the new year? I am still thinking about this. I'm thinking about it out loud. But as of this particular moment in time, I have kind of the following idea in mind. Exactly who and how I do this, I couldn't tell you. But I'm thinking that I'm going to break this group here into 2 segments. One of them is going to be just some sort of existing, leaving this Slack running in some form so you guys can communicate, at least for a while, and save whatever parts of it you might want to. So that's certainly part of it. And how we do that, that's probably the hardest one, because I'm not sure how I can deal with that from a time point of view. The second one is I am going to extract from this group a very, very small group of people who, if they are interested, I am interested in potentially mentoring them in one way or another. And that would be, help through combines, on to potentially much more intense than that. You know, I told you I have relationships in the past where I've kind of partnered with people on some level, and that's kind of the high end of that. Still looking for a trading partner or partners. You know, down the road, that might develop into that for somebody or a couple of people. Exactly how that will work, you know, that little mentoring group, how many people, who they are, it will be by invitation only. So you won't just be able to say, oh, I want to be in that group. You can say that and I will listen, but I'm looking for very specific stuff to kind of group that group together. And I want it to be really small. The absolute biggest it's going to be is probably 10 people. And right now, I think there's probably 4 or 5 that will be a good fit. And some of you I've talked to, some of you I haven't. That's cool. You know, again, I'm just thinking out loud here. But I just see something in you, and I see that you're learning from me at a rate that, you know, we could all benefit from. That's kind of what I'm thinking about with that little mentoring group. It will not be free. I don't want to make a living doing it. I don't have a clear idea how I will charge for it, or, you know, how that will work. I'm open to all kinds of ideas when I get there. You know, as I've said since day one, education in the trading space for me is not about making money. I used to do that. You know, that's great. Yeah, Lee has a really nice, you know, over at Emoji, a nice setup there and a kind of an infrastructure for doing that. I had something similar back in the day, and you know, and that's really cool. I just don't have the energy to be in that business anymore. I would love to partner into that business. I've mentioned that too. You know, maybe Lee and I will do some stuff together. We've talked about it, and we will be talking more this week. So, you know, I'm just kind of throwing out there that there's ongoing opportunities kind of for everybody, you know, depending on where you are and, you know, what your personal situation is. So keep thinking about that. You know, contact me if you're interested in that little tiny group. One of the ways I'm judging who's a fit is by the posts and the feedback in the Slack. So if you're totally silent there, I really don't have any way to understand what you're learning and what you're not, and whether or not, you know, there's a fit for that kind of thing. So, you know, you might want to be more active if you're interested in that, and you know, and you haven't been active. If you're already active out there, you know, it's pretty obvious. Look, there's a couple people. What I'm looking for here is people that have critical thinking skills. That's it. I don't care how long you've been doing this. I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you have a, you know, Chicago MBA, or, you know, you're a Rhodes Scholar, you know, or you can code in 45 languages. None of that matters. All that matters, you know, is if you have critical thinking skills, and I've watched you use those to get better at what you're doing. And, you know, we've got a couple of people that are obviously doing that visibly, and I'll call them out just because, you know, that's what I mean. The kinds of things that Amy posts and that Darren posts, you know, those are 2 simple, quick examples. But, you know, Darren has an analytical mind. You can see that. And, you know, he uses it to get better. Amy's been trying to make this work, you know, living out of her RV with her serviceman husband. And, you know, I have a lot of respect for those kinds of things, because, you know, you have to dig in at that level if you're truly going to make it in this business long term. You know, too many people just think they're going to come in and get rich quick, and I'm not interested in that kind of, you know, folks. I also am not interested in people coming in saying, oh, cool, this will be a really good opportunity for, thank you, Lee. This will be a really good opportunity for, you know, for me to push my Bollinger Band strategy to some. I'm not, you know, this will be continuing the path we're on. There's lots of opportunity for new developments of setups and ideas, but I'm not looking for anyone to come in with, you know, well, moving average crossovers of where, you know, go away. I just don't have any interest in talking to you if that's you. Not on that level. Okay, so so that was one thing. Second housekeeping thing, there's a lot of conversation going on right now in the Slack about footprints and whatnot. You know, a lot of it's in anything goes group chat. Some of it's in the process shares. Some of it's in my charts and indicators, because I am in the process of, and I'm almost done actually, moving to Ninja 8. And this is kind of where I'm at. The center thing isn't accurate anymore, but the sides, I've got a really cool setup, and I will share it with you in the next session. I may even go right to it. I'm happy with how it's working so far. I just need some more live data testing. But having said all that, look, footprints are a great tool. My personal experience with them is that they help me learn how to read order flow as it was happening. And also, comma, there's one particular thing that order flow solves with one of my setups. And I've mentioned that a few times in sessions, but ledges, particularly when you get to a ledge, there's often a trap seller, trap buyer circumstance there. And footprints, like a 5-minute footprint, is the absolute simplest way to see that in conjunction with, you know, your order flow on the dome. You can see it on the dome if you have jigsaw style domes, you know, because of those mini footprints that you can build. But beyond that, okay, why I'm saying all this, guys, I just don't want you guys to get buried in stuff like that. Not at this stage. You know, that's why I put up the emoji stuff channel. You know, if you really want to get into the depth, you know, more power to you. But, you know, once again, you know, there's kind of a good little summary of it when I was posting what I was doing with this footprint right here. And I'm not saying this because you're necessarily right or wrong about going into more depth. Some of you are exploring this. Kawika is doing that in some good conversations with Lee. And so this is good stuff. The only thing I really want to warn all of you about, and I kind of want to, you know, I want to encourage you to do what you're doing, you know, interacting with Lee and MZ Pack, and there's great footprint stuff out there. It's very, very easy, everybody. Listen very carefully to my next sentence. It's very easy to get buried in that. You know, I have another mentee who passed a combine last year, another woman, and she's really talented, but she has a huge flaw. And that is she's always looking for, you know, the next cool, perfect thing. And so she spends more time, you know, searching for the best tool, the new indicator, the new way to do a footprint, instead of perfecting her skill. Okay, so that's my only warning here. And it's they're exactly, Trader PD, the holy grail. You know, it doesn't exist. It's you. It's your skill development. So, you know, don't just get buried. Oh, I'm going to code till, you know, it shows me unfinished auctions and I'm going to have red lights flash. You know, you can go nuts at that level of indicator / you know, tool seeking. And I strongly recommend, yes, Amy, the Holy Grail's in you. And the further along you get, the less stuff you need. You know, that's kind of the moral of the story about what I'm doing in my Ninja 8 setup. And let me just show you one thing about it here, just to make that point. You know, forget the domes. Look, the way that I will be focused on trading this is on the domes. And those are the day trader domes. They don't look like this anymore, but they're actually getting better. I will share, and I can share templates of mine now in 8 and in day trader. So I will do that for those of you using that. But that's not what I wanted to mention here. What I wanted to mention was, you know, building this footprint as a way to solve one specific problem that I have. So that is why I made a specific footprint view on one of my tabs. And the range is the same, the Renko is the same, the minute is just that 5-minute view that I like, and the tick is just that fast view zoomed in and out. But the whole idea here is that, you know, if you look at the way this is laid out, my focus is on the middle of the screen and on the domes, because that's really all I need to see once we get going. This other context stuff, if I need a quick reference or I want to look up, you know, what the low was overnight or whatever, you know, or where, it's a really easy way to keep an eye on that. And, you know, each one of these, this one is oil, this one's gold, this one over here is the ES, and this is the NQ, and then there's 4 tabs for each. So it's a real quick way to do research on the fly while trading on the domes, okay? So do not get buried in looking for new chart formats. Get buried in learning how to trade on the depth of sales, as, you know, as Jigsaw calls it, because it's really more than the dome, you know, with all the footprint data and what that you can get in there. Pete's added some really cool stuff to the day trader implementation that I have not showed you. And if you're playing with day trader, you've seen it. But like, there's some momentum tools and whatnot in there that are really useful again. So So that was just my number two thing, so number one, what happens next after the group ends in January, that's important. We'll all talk about that. Number two, don't get buried in finding new tools. Focus on developing your skill. Focus on making your Bubba you. Don't get caught in the minute. I'm reading all of your comments here in the chat. Why is that doing that? Okay, Slack sometimes hangs. I am going to close it. Give me 2 seconds here. This is all my old Windows 7 stuff, which is wonderful and doesn't break very often, but it still has Windows 7 limitations. Okay, so yeah, you know what, you guys are all saying exactly the right thing. Exactly, Jerry. It's about practicing one thing and getting really good at it. It's been difficult for the last 2 weeks. David, I love you guys that are 20 and 30 years old, or that have been trading for 18 months or 2 years. I love how, God, this week, I just couldn't get my stuff to work. Guess what? You're going to have a lot of weeks like that. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Ninja 8 has all the tools you really need. I mean, there's a conversation going on about, whose footprints are better, and again, Lee's got some great ideas and good feedback there, and has a tool coming for Ninja. MZ Pack is good. FinAlg is one I've used and like. But again, for the purposes of what I'm trying to do, the one in Ninja 8 is great. And I'm not so much recommending you get the full version to get the order flow tools. You get other stuff, you get lower commissions if you're trading through them and whatnot. So, in the long run, it's probably better to get that full version and not, one of the least ones. Okay, so that was point number 2. Point number 3, as I mentioned, this form that's up there, we're going to talk a little bit about that. But more importantly, I guess I need to reopen Slack for a second, but I don't want it bugging us. So anywho, I threw this up in announcements, and best setups by time of day, both in Excel worksheet format, so you can modify it yourselves, and also an image of it. So this is the thing we're going to spend most of this session talking about. And I really, really want you guys to understand why it's so important. Last session we started to talk about the fact that, there's really 2 roles. There's 2 jobs that traders have. The first thing is, execution, and that's the skill development, and that's, how fast can you see the setup on the dome and, hit buy market or sell market and whatever. And everybody's saying the same thing, and you're all right. The only answer to getting that right is practice. I'm not being critical, David. You can have as many questions as you want. All I'm saying is that, people like me that are 59 years old have the benefit of life experience, and you just get a little more patient for a number of reasons. There's nothing wrong with having that intensity that, gosh, this week, and Maria said she posted the same thing. I just can't get it to work this week. Well, roll over the holidays, take your pick of the reasons. But, I responded to her when I said, the fact that you just didn't lose money is a testament to the skill you're developing. And that's what you got to be thinking. And that's how you should all be focused. Okay. But having said that, there are many, many, many ways that you can get better at that stuff if you build structure. So, you're all familiar with my process. And when I say that, I'm talking about this one. Okay. And I've said, as I posted this, and as you guys have worked on your own, that this didn't always used to be in this format. I had it in a flowchart format initially, because that kept me from making mistakes. And then, on the Slack, I think I posted that kind of handwritten one. That was something I was working on. Yeah, this thing right here. And I was getting you toward what I just posted today. And so let's go back to that document. Oh, come on. I've been going back and forth between Windows, between different versions of Windows 7 and Windows 10, and it's pretty much driving me nuts because I know them both really well, but I always forget where things are. So anyway, this machine is going to be retired from its day-to-day job, and By the way, I may have a really fast machine available at low cost. This is a really cool, my old Windows 7 machine will run Windows 10. It's a really good fast machine. Um, so anyway, if somebody wants to talk about that, we can. All right, so the real reason we're here today is to talk about, you have this process, right? And I said, there are some more linear ways to go, or more flow ways to go about that. And so if you think about your process as kind of like the 10,000 foot view, this is kind of like all the stuff that goes on, but it doesn't really keep you from making mistakes if you're jumping around in it. And that was the problem with this for people that hadn't gotten to this point yet. And, like I said, this worked for me, but I get why it may not work for you. So this is the way to solve that. And it is also Steve Weber and gosh, a dozen other ones. Your name just came to mind. But the whole concept of the transition from scalping to intraday swings and back and forth and catching those really big moves, like when the first hour high is to the tick, the high or the low of the day. And, those are really, really good setups to get, but you have to have your mind focused properly at different times. So that's what this is about. So let's just go through this thing. I'll explain how it works. It's pretty self-explanatory from my point of view, but from yours, it isn't. But this is kind of the final piece. Remember in the session when I announced this, I said this is really important because, any one of you can execute the first hour, high setup or the open 5A or HMOMO or springs or up thrusts. Most of you get the concepts of the setups and that executing that setup is really just a matter of practice. I mean, you all just said that, right? Or, your Bubba, some setups work better for some personalities. Me, I can do HMOMO any time of the day or night. I can roll out of bed and trade HMOMO because it's just naturally the way I am. Whereas, interpreting a really good first hour high swing setup, I have to think about it a little more and I have to kind of slow myself down. That's that idea of the 5 minutes of context, this right over here, okay? So let's go through this. Whoops. There's the Windows 10.7 stuff again. Okay, so let's just start. What I did here is I said, all right, many of you are struggling with adapting to, like Darren and I have some great conversations in the Slack about what should you do differently at night? And so I kind of start with that here. The first time of day, and the TOD is time of day. Session is what session is that? And I break it into the overnight and the RTH for good reason. We'll come back to that in a minute. Instruments, I've got the ES, NQ, YM, and RTY all grouped together, okay? Because those are the indexes and they don't always correlate, but when they do, it's relevant. As you know, CL and GC, I kind of trade by themselves. And then all anytime, what that means is just any one of the instruments at any time of the day or night, HMOMO and spring up thrust setups are valid. So, you pretty much don't need to do any filtering if you're looking at those setups. They're pretty much okay to take anytime you want. Now, with every one of these, there are factors that are important, but the way that I organize this section, oh shit, I'm not on the spreadsheet. I'm trying to highlight and I can't. Okay. Whoa, hold on. Okay, here we go. This is where I want to be. All right. So, so this stuff right here is basically just all the setups organized by time of day and session and in columns by setup instrument, okay? Now this section over here on the right, don't worry about for now. Let's just stay focused in on this part right here, okay? So I group these together again because they tend to be correlated, and if they're not, that's just as relevant as when they are. If you're trading multiple energy instruments, you might want to do the same thing, if you're trading gasoline, for example. And then I've got notes on each one, and I'll go through and explain that in a second. Adjustments, which are slightly different than notes. Again, to me, this is self-explanatory, but it won't be until we go through it. And then this is what I mentioned in the last session about get in the habit of looking at context before you take a trade. And what I mean by that is the technical picture from the last day or two or three or four, the intraday auction structure, and then the very immediate, most granular order flow. If you do that, you'll always be on the right side of the trade, or at least you won't make a huge mistake by being on the wrong side. You'll realize it right away. Okay, so let's go through Again, these are just the setups here. We'll come back to that. Notes. Okay, notes is a way of me just, why is this relevant at this particular time block? So at 6 o'clock at night, and again, this is my time zone, and it's not exactly then. Sometimes I see it at 5, sometimes I see it at 7:30, depending on the news in Asia. But that's what this is about. Gold often gets busy because of Asia and the Middle East, and the further we go into the evening, the more true that is. So that's still true at midnight and at 10 p.m. It just gets started here. So that's why I note it there. Now this is what I call an adjustment. If I tried to do a trade like I'm going to try to do during the regular session, and then compare that same kind of trade to the overnight, an adjustment you need to make is that in the overnight you want to look for extremes. You don't want to try to trade like, the high of the day of the regular session. You want to look for the high of the regular session that day. And 3 days before that, there was an overnight high. You get what I'm saying. Overnight setups tend to work much better at extremes. In the middle, you can really get chopped up because of the lower volume and, events happening in the news. The second part about adjusting for overnights is, you generally want to look for extremes, either that or real high momentum, which is, whenever you see HMOMO, that's why this is here. You can trade it because the rule is always simple. Get a trade on, get the stuff between you and your entry, and let it rip. If you can do that any time of the day or night, nothing else matters. And that's why I love that setup. I leave my computer running. It's always up on HMOMO chart setups. So that if I walk by and, I could be just coming in from, I just, ran the hill I live on for 20 minutes. I'm coming back in, about to take a shower. Oh my God, there's an HMOMO. Boom, you can grab it. You don't need any other context for those. So that's why I have that there. And then the last piece of the adjustments for overnight is you have to only play small ranges if you're playing ranges. So, ranges are legitimate in the overnight, but and this was what I mentioned, how, for example, getting my gold trade risk management good. It's a range trade that I'm doing. I'm typically doing it overnight. And the only mistake that I ever made with that trade, and again, now I've got close to 100 live trade, real money examples and a couple thousand sims. And it's always the same mistake. I put on too much side in a range trade that's working, and then something in the environment changes, news item or whatever, and that range busts out, but it does it in kind of a slow, drippy way that sucks me in. And so I've just put that there because it keeps me from making that mistake. Okay. Now, the same kind of adjustment you've heard me say, and this one is worth me doing this with. The only significant mistake I make at the open is sometimes I'll read the order flow as being contrary to the price movement. We've seen an example of this that one day I lost some money in front of all of you. I usually make that mistake when I don't feel well, because when I feel well, I tend to be sharper, which makes total human sense, right? But I've made that mistake on days where, here's a really good example of where I make this mistake, okay? I make this mistake, and by the way, this is the kind of stuff you learn from journaling all of your trades. So, that's that other spreadsheet, this kind of thing that I told you where you log them in groups or individually. So we'll come back to that. But the only mistake is that one. And hang on one second, somebody's pointing at me and doing a mime. Excuse me 1 second. I have to. Yes, that is so true what you just said, Darren. I'm going to pause right here. Post questions if you have any. I just have to talk to someone here that has an emergency with their dog. It's my next door neighbor. I will be back in less than a minute. Okay, guys, I'm back. My apologies. My I have a new neighbor who's uh, renting a little studio on the property on my next door neighbor's property, which has a bunch of little rental units on it and tiny homes and stuff. It's really cool. But she just retired as a vet tech and is starting a career in real estate, as many middle-aged retired women like to do. And anyway, she has 3 dogs and 2 cats in a studio. Every now and then she has an issue. Okay, so I'm going to look at the questions real quick and then we'll continue. Okay, Remo, so the obvious question, why not ranges on the indexes overnight? Okay, anybody want to take a stab at that one? Okay, I'll take a stab at it. The reason is because, yeah, they're derived, exactly. Lee nailed it. Insufficient, yeah, those are both correct. The whole idea of the range trade in any, whether it's gold or, the indexes during the day or whatever, but the whole idea of the range trade is that here's a really good example where that comes up. Yeah, the derivative of the derivative, exactly. And the other problem, and that's why it generally doesn't work, because the stuff it's a derivative of isn't open. So, nobody has a base. And then the other reason that happens, the best place for the range trade, and this is a really good thing about the range trade that I've said, but I don't know if I've emphasized. The range trade works the best when, let me go grab another chart here somewhere, just, there should be a first hour high, low. Perfect. Okay. Look at any, whoops, that's not the one I wanted. Sorry. Look at any, here we go. This is what I want. Look at any 5-minute chart, with the first hour high low, and you'll see there are 2 behaviors that happen a lot. And by the way, you can make a living again just on this. Okay. So this is one of those, if you're struggling to find your one bubba that just, is the thing you want to start with doing first, focused, this is a good one to look for. If you're not comfortable trading the open 5A when it's just crazy fast, cool. Wait for the first hour to form. When it does, you will very frequently see a setup like this where that's the reversal point of the day or whatever. That right there is, if you're going to only trade once or twice a day, if you're one of those, I only want to do a few trades, then the only thing you should be looking for is that one. That is the classic one. Okay. Come back to that more later as we talk more about first hour highs and lows. But where I'm going with this now is that the best range trades are when it starts doing this, okay, later on in the day, because it's a predictable range. So you can sell it up here, you can buy it down here. It will do that for 3 hours. So that's the answer to your question. And I'm going to show you a really good example of that in a second, because as you get down into what I call the rookie roast, the mid part of the day, the range trade, you can clean up trading the range with lots of size, because the odds it's going to break it in the middle of the day are really low. So, the time that I'm doing 50 and 20 lot scalps, where you guys are doing the one tick drill, in the middle of the day, I take the range and the one tick drill and I combine them and I put on a lot of size, 10, 15, 20 lots in the ES. Because all you're looking for is it to stay in, Pete calls it the 8-tick dance, and that's exactly right. It will just go back and forth in a 2-point ES 8-tick range until something pushes it out. And there are algorithms that trade that, and you can see them trading it and hop on with them. And, that's how you trade the range. So that's the answer to your question. And yeah, Lee said that, absolutely correct. The problem with the indexes, and again, it's important to keep this fundamental shit. This is what I've said. Well, this is nonsense, but it's important nonsense. Like understanding that the indexes are derivatives of derivatives of derivatives, and overnight, there's no legitimate way to truly understand values. That's the problem. Whereas true, hard, real commodities like the CL and the GC, there are people trading those who are not speculators, and you need to remember that. So remember, over and over again, this always comes down to, you'll hear it from Lee, you'll hear it from me, you'll hear it from most experienced traders. Who is on the other side of your trade? Anytime you have a question, that will almost always answer it. Why not trade the indexes at night? Because I have no idea what's going on the other side of the trade, other than just, what? Well, the thing that works all the time is HMOMO. And guess what? Springs and up thrusts work too. They work any time of the day or night as long as you follow the rules. The rules of spring and up thrusts are really, really simple. There's only one. Does anybody know what it is? Please post it in the chat. You know, the docism, Jeff here, he likes to make things as simple as possible. So the HMOMO, there's one rule. Get in and get the stop between you and your trade. That is all you need to know. That's not true in springs and up thrusts, though. You go, all right, that's low volume pullback is when you take a spring, but yeah, that's right, Dr. Shaw, but that's not what I'm looking for. Those are all ways to remember I was saying that there's a score, you know, an idea of scoring something, you know, with aces or ace king or down to jack jack. Okay, what you guys are talking about is the score. That's what you're doing. So you're missing the real subtle point. The only thing about springs and up thrust that you need to know is that you must do it on one time frame, period. No imbalances, has nothing to do with imbalances. Spring and up thrust setup can only be done on one time frame, and you just have to pick one. Doesn't mean you always have to use that time frame. One of the things you'll see that I did a little differently, because it's easy to switch on my NinjaTrader 8, is my 5-minute chart. I've switched that to like 2 and 3 minutes, so I can see the 5-minute setup developing. Okay, and that's a really good example of that, because remember, at the open 5A, all we're really trying to do is see, you know, where the energy is. And so having, you know, that 5-minute chart set up, but have it on 2 or 3 minutes at the open makes some sense, because you can see that. So for springs and up thrusts, which occur any time of the day or night, 24 hours a day, pick a time frame. The best ones are short time frames of time. Okay, so if you're going to play springs and up thrusts, look for a 1 to 5 minute time-based chart. You will see them the most visibly there. Oh, sorry, Amy. Don't worry about it. We'll talk more. Yeah, no, I know that's a pain in the ass, but okay. Yeah, 30 seconds works. What Jerry's saying is true. I agree with that. If you're looking for springs, 30 seconds is best, and I'll tell you why. It's a very simple, again, you know, a lot of times you'll find something that works. You won't understand exactly why it works best, but you'll just see that it does. And the answer to that is very, very simple. That 30 seconds works the best because there are so many old school technical traders that use 1 minute time frame charts. So there are entire armies of algorithms that trade 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and 30-second bars, because they know that they can pull off a trade inside of a bar that the 1 minute guys are watching, and they take them to the cleaners doing that. So, you know, if you see, oh, perfect example is the 1 minute Bollinger Band traders over there in Top Steps group. You know who I'm talking about. Just for fun, when they're doing that, put up a 30-second chart, you know, set up like our chart is, and just, you know, open, high, low, close kind of thing. Oh, and one other thing that is also available in Ninja 8 that is kind of cool. And again, you know, I look for just incremental improvements in my charting and in my structure. I don't like try to reinvent the wheel or get something all new. And this one right over here, they finally implemented equivolume charts in Ninja 8, and I love them. That's what this is here. So this is what I was talking about. This is the 3 minute, whoops. This is the 3 minute view of my 5 minute layout. But instead of using regular candles, what I did was I used equivolume candles. So it just draws, the green and the red isn't why I did it, because, you know, I tend to avoid green and red, but what this does is it makes them bigger by the amount of volume. So not only was this a drop, but it was a really high volume drop into the bottom of the first hour low. And so you could kind of really see that reversal. And so I really like this. And once again, this is equivolume in Ninja 8. I don't know if that's part of the order flow suite or not, because I have the whole thing, so I don't know, you know, which comes with what. You know, obviously, you know, get what you can afford. But I think in the long run, it doesn't make sense to do anything else with Ninja because your commission rate's better and all that, you know. Okay, so Yes. Free one has as well. It does. Okay, cool. Then that's a really cool, nice little addition. And there's all kinds of great third-party code for Ninja 8 out there. But again, guys, over and over again, I will encourage you not to get lost in the way I used to beat up my mentee that did that. She was constantly looking for new chart setups and new indicators and downloading free trials. And I said, you know what? You're a professional student. The pursuit of new knowledge was what she was doing. And I love that because I do that too. But the problem was for a newbie, and she was a trader with 9 years of experience, successfully trading technical patterns, moving to order flow. That was what I did with her. And I got her through a combine doing order flow after she failed 14 of them in a row trying to use technical analysis. But anyway, that was the problem. She's like, oh, wow, this friend of mine showed me this thing and I went to a meetup and this guy has this new, guess what, guys? That's a distraction you cannot afford. Exactly, Emilio. You cannot afford that at this stage of your career. You have to focus on what we're doing on this document right here. And that is, we are focused on what you should be doing. Remember, back here on this item right here, time of day productive. Many of you have other responsibilities, children, jobs, career, whatever. And so it's really important that when you're trading, you make it count. And this is the way to do that, is this grid. So let's continue just going through the individual items, and I'll explain it. So that was the answer about spring and up thrust. Remember, any one time frame is good. If you're looking for really big moves, the 5 minute is a good one. If you're looking for scalping in and out on springs and up thrust, the 30-second is a good one. Okay, so that was the answer to that. Now let's go back over here and talk about the adjustments and the notes, and then we'll go through the setups. But the idea here is, let's say you can only trade one thing. Well, you can see by what I highlighted, your focus should be right here. You should trade the open, and you should trade it with the open 5A, and then the first hour high and low, and any momentum or springs that happens along the way. And if you just do that and you do it well, you should be able to make a living. And that's all there is to it. So let's go back to the adjustments. Again, if you're going to trade overnight, you have to use small ranges because big ranges by definition will kill you. And it also means you're wrong. The whole idea of the range trade is it's tight. You can always do HMOMO. That's in the overnight. There's a filter I put on that's my personal one, but again, if you're going to do HMOMO at night, the vast majority of HMOMO trades will end up being fades of a sudden move. Like there'll be a news event and we get a big spike, and unless you were in already, you'll miss that trade. But the real trade was the fade of that after, the news gets priced in. So watch for those and watch for them at extremes. And, pretty much that's all I suggest doing at night. Anything else is dangerous. Okay, so that's why I have that. Okay, the notes, CL open, that's the old pit open at 6 o'clock my time. And again, I just have it there because there's usually a little bit of energy in oil and it's worth watching, and at that point, you can sometimes catch some really nice edge moves in oil. So that's why. Okay, now, the other comments here, I mentioned this was the one mistake I make at the open. I think my my Ninja 8 charts will solve that because it will keep me focused on what I should be focused on. But as we go into the open, this chunk right here becomes really important of the notes, as do the rest of these. So let me just zip through these and tell you what my notes actually mean. So, okay, the open 5A, we're all familiar with that. This is prime time to trade for the next 2 hours. So if you're going to do nothing else, this should be your focus right here. Okay. So again, for those of you trying to find your first Bubba, pass your first combine, or get consistent with Top Step's, rule structure, that's the spot you're going to do it right there. Because, you've seen over and over again, if you catch the open 5A and you're on the right side of it, you can typically make, using 50 K Top Step metrics, a couple of contracts, you can easily make $500 a day doing that. I mean, and that's, the people that I mentioned that I mentored and coached through 50Ks, that's the approach. get in, get 500 bucks, get out, and the day's over. That's how you should be approaching that. And you shouldn't be using any more than 2 or 3 contracts ever, because the loss limit will kill you if you don't. So anyway, so that's why I consider that to really be important. Now, the only other things to really consider there are these, and these things are important in the first 2 hours. And I don't use any of them as decision vectors in a trade. In other words, I won't take or not take a trade. If there's a good open 5 setup that has HMOMO, I'm in, get my stop in, and I'm good to go, right? Or, let's say I'm doing a spring at the open, that would be like a pullback down to the top of the opening 5 high, for example. And that's typically where I'd see a spring. So I'll jump in and, might give that a slight more room than HMOMO, but not much, a couple ticks maybe. I won't try to get my stop in quite as quickly, and I'll probably grab profits quicker there because springs tend to end, whereas HMOMO goes until it stops. So the things that I filter that decision process with, okay, is chop. And one of you said something really profound a couple of webinars ago. We were looking at price discovery, and somebody, I think it might have been David that said this, or Alessandro said that, wow, there's a real difference between the ebb and flow and price discovery. And that's what I'm talking about. Chop is, that was you. Okay, Trader PD. All right. So the chop is when you just see just back and forth movement that doesn't make any sense. That's chop, okay? And that's not the same thing as price discovery, because price discovery, if you take a step back from it, makes total sense. I mean, it's what you want to trade when you're trading HMOMO. Chop is where it just goes back and forth and it doesn't follow through anywhere, and big giant chunks of trading are going on everywhere, and that's what chop looks like. It just doesn't make sense, okay? In correlation, or the lack of it, we all know what that is when the indexes are all moving together or not. That's something to consider. It's a filter. Sweeps. Again, sweeps are just dangerous because they can stop you out in a good trade rather suddenly. So, if I'm seeing sweeps, and again, just by definition, a sweep is when one trade hits the tape and just takes out, 3, 4, 5, 6 price levels. And that's because that trade was bigger than those were individually. So it had to sweep through them to get filled. And, that's where you'll have, like, if you're a 1 or 2 lot trader, this will happen, guys, and you've got a really nice trade going, in the ES, you're up 1.5 points, so you're up $75 on your 1 lot. And then the sweep will hit the tape and you'll go from up $75 to down 100 in a beat, in an instant. And it's just like, God damn it, what happened? Well, a sweep happened. And if those are happening, that's a warning to be very careful trying to trade stuff like ranges, for example, okay? The volatility and volume, those are not chop. Chop doesn't make sense. Volatility makes sense. It just, is movement touching extremes and then moving back. So it just looks different. You'll get the hang of it over time. Volume is simply volume. So vola is volatility, volu is volume. I just abbreviate. Gaps, again, whenever you see a gap, take a step back and give it more time. So that's where this idea becomes really important, that the first hour high and low is greater than or more important than the open 5A. So that's what the idea of a gap sensitivity is about. And then internals, I just look at them to see, if we're going up and the internals are just crazy strong, not overcooked, but, an 800 tick and, advanced decline is, at 2,000, advancers and there's 500 decliners or whatever. All right, that's a really strong tape. And so you just don't want to get on the other side of that tape until it starts looking like there's gaps or weakness in that tape. And another example might be, again, the tick, a tick of 800 is strong. A tick of 1,500 is not sustainable. So if I'm looking for a fade trade, I'll look for the internals to get really high. And, that will be a sign that I'm probably at the right spot, or at least getting close to it. So that's all this means. I don't trade off any of those, but they're just things I look at in the back of my mind. Let's see. Funny thing is that the little issue, ebb and flow versus price discovery. Well, very good. That's a cool thing. Someday when we do reviews of this workshop, I'd love for you to share that, Pavel, what you just said, because often the difference between profitability and not is understanding something fundamental that the Furu just don't teach. And if somebody doesn't point it out to you, you'll just never think of it. And that's a really good example that, price discovery versus ebb and flow versus chop, those are all very, very different personalities of what a rookie would interpret as the same behavior. And so thank you. That's, I appreciate that. All right. So that's what this stuff over here is about. And another thing I'd like you to notice is, as I've said, this block right here is, what I call prime time. And everything pretty much holds true during prime time, except there's a transition, okay? And for those of you, scalp versus intraday swings, Steve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, this is a really key point right here. Amy, you brought this up once. I think Maria said this once. I know Darren has said it. I've said it over and over again. Okay, so at 6:30, at 9:30 New York, the only thing you want to be worried about is the open 5A and, Momo. That's all that matters, with these considerations, okay? And then as it transitions to the first hour, all the economic news is going to be in. Everybody sees the intentions of the traders. So now it becomes really important to consider that the behavior of the first hour is going to be more important or additive to the behavior of the open. And we talked about this a lot last time. If you see the open 5 in the middle of the first hour, well, that tells you that the range expanded and, people have more information about the day. That's very typical. That's the most typical scenario. Other scenarios will be the open 5 is below the first hour. Guess what? You could have a trend day going or a potential setup to flip and go the other direction. So that's why, once you get to that point, and then for the remainder of the next hour, that's really what you should be considering right there. That's really the inflection points that are going to be the most important. And how should you be considering it? Well, you want to be looking, once the open 5 settles into the first hour, you want to be looking for potential flip trades. And my goodness, all you got to do is go back in the last few weeks. These are occurring literally every day. The first hour high is the high of the day, or, the first hour low is the low of the day. Just take your pick. There's just dozens of these there, and they're in the open 5. Just over and over again, you see this, I posted this one on the way up, and this is, again, a really good example. There's the open 5 trade, and then it transitions into a H-Momo trade. Then there's a couple of spring setups along the way, and then the first hour ends, and all that's over. And then there was a really cool up thrust and a really great short, and it evolved into, if you wanted to trade the rest of the day, I would look at ranges. So most days do stuff like that. They pretty much follow that that sequence. So that's what, this to this to this is. An high volume reversal, if you're going to get it, is typically going to be between 7:30 and 8:30. And let's close that back down. So that is what I'm looking at up through the end of the second hour. So that's the next 120 minutes. So basically this chunk right here, and that's really, prime time. If you trade well there, you should be able to make a living doing that, and you shouldn't have to sit at your computer all day. Okay, then what happens? Then something that Jeff likes to call the rookie roast starts. That's what RR is, the rookie roast. It used to be a lot worse before the days of algorithms when the pit was still open. The locals on the floor, and ask Hogue or Eddie Horn or any of the guys or Michael, any of the guys at Top Step about this. They used to just rape the rookies between like 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock. It's about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and literally what they do is they just get it going one way and get a bunch of guys committed, and then they go the other way. And so you can see this really good if you have like an order book view, whether it's Jigsaw's Auction Vista or any view that's showing liquidity, and I know a lot of people train and sell that kind of a viewpoint. I don't really use it, but you'll see it at this time of the day being the most useful. where the big traders, and again, not so much as it used to be, but they do have the ability to push people around, and they will, because most of the traders that trade the open maybe are on the sidelines or at lunch. That's used to be, quite frankly, why we had the rookie roast, because the rookie roast at 9, think about it, 9:30 my time in New York is lunchtime. And so the guys that were in the pit, the locals in the pit, when everybody else was at lunch getting drunk or doing cocaine or whatever they used to do back on the floor, the guys in the pit would just be able to just push it around. And there were no algorithms in those days. And, they were the human algorithms. Now algorithms do this too, but it's, a lot of times news comes out now in this time frame, and that will be the tradable event. So this isn't totally true anymore, but the behavior is the same. You basically only want to focus at this time of day on, fading the first hour high and low, the open 5, like we've already talked about, playing tight ranges and playing edges and ledges, within the rules of those trades. And that pretty much goes on up until the close. And then typically around 11, but lately it's been closer to 12. So the last, hour and a half to an hour, we get these crazy high momentum moves. I know you know what I'm talking about. It'll be 12:30, half an hour to go, and all of a sudden the market will just light a fire under its rear, and we'll go right back up to the high of the day for no reason. A lot of that is I wouldn't call it manipulation because it's not organized, but just by virtue of the fact that if everybody goes to do the same thing at the same time, it can cause that. You see a lot of that in the last half hour lately. And so, the way that I integrated that into my, core process is, here's the last hour. And it's not a true market on the close play, which actually is, playing on the actual closing orders right at 1 o'clock or, 4 o'clock in New York. It's not that. It's just that high Momo, entering into the close. That's what I'm talking about. So, going into this time of day, the last hour, lately I've been looking for that trade, and a couple of days I made some real nice money, just jumping into momentum. But that pretty much, gives you kind of a roadmap for the whole day. And, you can pretty much not make mistakes if you follow this, and looking at CL and GC. Again, I don't like the other setups in oil and gold. The only ones I really like are spring and up thrust, but I do see some really nice plays off the open 5 frequently in oil and gold. And I know the ones I'm talking about. They typically are fades of the open 5 or the first hour, where it'll get back to them and then continue the trend in the direction it was going. Gold and oil do that better than any other thing. So if you see those, they're good setups to take. But otherwise, I really like to focus on HMOMO with respect to oil and gold, simply because any other setups I have had, I've had big losers trying to trade them the way I trade them with the indexes. So rather than, start from scratch over there, I just kind of said to myself, well, I consistently make money here, and every now and then go grab some money there or there. That might, your approach might be totally different. It might be, what, I'm only going to trade oil, and I'm only going to trade, those and momentum. And, that's a perfectly valid approach. And that's why I gave you this. I want you to kind of just, take it and make it your own. You may only have this 1 hour right here to trade, and that's fine. Then this is what you should focus on, and really nothing else. So what I'm attempting to do, and I see by some of the comments that it's landing for some of you, that I'm trying to take this whole idea and put it down into 3 chunks. You've got your kind of overall process, getting your body right, and staying humble and all that, and having context. But then really what it's all, in order to do this over here well, you really want to dial into the time of the day and the specific setups that work, at those times of the day. So that's the main meat of this session. And it went a little longer than I wanted it to, but I think I made all the points I want to make. Let me just go back and look at my notes real quick. And yeah, I think that does cover that. So I'm going to pause there for questions, and then just FYI, I'm still going to do the second half of this if anybody wants to do it. I had planned on doing open office hours, and I've done those in the past. It's basically, you know, any topics are, you can talk about whatever you want, and I'll answer questions about anything from politics to trading and anything in between. Okay, so questions about the playbook. So, you know, I've been teaching you setups. This is what a playbook looks like. A playbook is setups by time of day with filters and keynotes. That's a playbook. And by the way, you know, like if you get into, you know, journalytics, which is the other half of Day Trader, and it has a playbook section right here, you know, where you can put your playbook in and then just identify them as you trade, and you can do it with voice, guys. You know, this is a really cool application. I'm just starting to play with its capabilities. You need a pretty good computer and a pretty good connection, but it will do voice. And that, you know, with your setup playbook and taking notes while you're trading, that's a pretty cool way to do it. So anyway, questions about this, about the playbook integration with time of day. Let's see, any advice on identifying best environments to do one-tick drills? Ooh, that's a really good question. The best environment I have found to do one-tick drills is when there is unstructured high momentum. So, you know, those like the days we had last week where we were just going one way or the other with no follow through. You know, instead of trying to trade anything else, it's a really good time to do one-tick drills because, you know, if you have any bias whatsoever, you will get burned. So, you know, one-tick drills for me are successful in one of two times. Range-bound trading, you know, when I'm actually trading the range, and that often occurs, you know, in here, this time frame. And then the other place I like to do one-tick drills is when we have, you know, just choppy days and nothing else is really going on to trade. You know, I'll either go to the sim or I'll go to a real account and I'll just look for places where I just think I can't go wrong on those. And 9 times out of 10, they, you know, God, more than that, they work. If I'm really in the zone, I'm about 95% winners on the one-tick drills. And that you should shoot for north of 80% on those. But again, there's all different ways. Losing money is just as educational there. And having a financial goal, like I'm going to do the one-tick drill until I make $500, you know, that works too. All right, so there we go. All right, Amy, what you just said, 3 excellent days and 2 scratches. It doesn't get better than that. You know, if you said I had 2 excellent days and 2 scratches and one day I just got raped, okay, guess what? You know, that's worse. So, you know, if you can do it and just have good days and scratches, then you're learning what you need to learn from it. Yeah, during the rookie roast, you know, this time right here, which is lunch, that's a really good time to try anything because it's typically unstructured and it's a good time to learn to fail. So, okay, let's see. Helios only traded the overnight session for okay. So, no. I'm not saying to only focus on GL or CL and GC. I'm saying that if you're going to trade the indexes overnight, the only things you should focus on are these with these adjustments. Okay, so do you understand the distinction between what I'm saying and what you said, Helios? Yeah, this column, it's important because HMOMO, springs and upthrust, will work any time of the day or night. The only difference is if you're going to do it overnight, do it with less size. You know, it's hard to argue at overnight doing more than a contract or two because no matter how skilled you are, you know, if you get a 5 lot going and you're on the wrong side. So, so that's the point. Yes. Okay, good. So you get it. All right. Yeah, one-tick drills work really good during regular trading hours, extended and rookie roast. I agree with you, Trader PD, on that. You know, another good place to do one-tick drills is right before the open, like as long as there's no news. You know, if there's news coming, that will screw it up. And you can do, you know, HMOMO against the news. But the time, like, I used to call it the pre-open. So this right here, the CL open, and this is the ES NQ pre-open. And I'll tell you what I mean about that in a second. So the pre-open used to be, we used to call it posturing. So, and you often see that at that time of the day. And posturing was, again, 20 years ago when there was no algorithms, it was, who's got the biggest swinging dick, quite literally. I mean, there was a guy that used to do audio of the pit, and he used to call one of the traders number one. And if you've been around the pit, you know who that guy is. And just by virtue of that guy coming into the pit, the whole mood would change. And it's harder to do that in the electronic world, but it's not impossible. So so what you see is posturing. You'll see some algorithms trying to push if they can, if we're near any overnight high or low or whatever. So that's worth noting. If you had to pick two sessions, it would be the day red map and the CL6 session. Yeah, see that is exactly what this tool is for. Remo, you nailed it. And so, that's why I hope you guys all understand why I said what I said, that, now that you understand setups, this is really, and understand, the importance of a process, this collective process, but not this part of it. This part of it, basically, instead of this for you guys, okay, so imagine, that okay, let's just do this for a second. So I can just make a point, okay? So you might want to take this part and then, bolt this into there. And you could certainly do that. That's the beauty of doing this, with spreadsheets. You can kind of screw around. And, maybe that's the right answer here. Is like that. That might be a really cool way to do your process. And just, get my pictures out of here, And let's see. So you get, so you get the idea. Oh, come on. You get the idea. Actually, this is what I would recommend for most of you is integrating this style with something like this where your times of day, are relevant. Okay, so let's go on, see if we have any, all right, no more questions or comments about that? Okay. Will you be posting the XL version? I thought I did, didn't I? Hang on. I think it's right. Yeah, it's right here. Best setups by time of day, XLS. That is it. So feel free to, yeah, the picture's right above it. Yeah, there's things about Slack that are a pain in the ass, and then there's things about Slack that are really cool. So anyway, so I think all of you I think the value of this got through. Good, Greg. Good. Thank you, Dr. Shaw. Okay. So this really should be where most of you are right now. And if you can do that integrated view, and that works for you, please share them. I'd really like to see them. And I think that will be a really, really cool way to go on to the next step for many of you. One second here, Jesus. Again, by going back and forth so much, that's what I was trying to do. Thank you. Okay. Again, just a fun kind of an aside, I mentioned I think in the last webinar that, so the last real job I ever had in my life was I was employed by Microsoft through one of their third-party leasing companies as a Windows guru, literally. And I would go around and train groups of millennials and resellers on different Windows products and Office products and how to resell them and whatnot. And so I really know them well, but boy, going back and forth between Windows 10 and Windows 7, and pretty much now I just use, the docs in Google if I can get away with it. So, oh, I did want to show you guys one more thing about this, and I will give you guys this if you want it. This other, okay, before I say that, let's first, okay, so I posted this a while ago and suggested you guys all do it for, particularly if you're doing a combine, this thing, okay? Whoops, this thing. So, and I think this is a really cool way. And one of the things that came up as questions about this, God, do I have to log every trade? And the answer is no, particularly if you're scalping, you know, and doing HMOMO scalps, you could do 10 of them and just put, trades, 8 through, 17 or whatever. So that's one way to deal with that. I do have the original template of this. It's not in this form like this one, but it'll save a tiny bit of time because I've already started doing the choosers, where you can choose an instrument. And I also have something in here called day type, which is like trend up, trend down, range, it's the overnight. So if you want, I can share this one too. Let's see, oops. And does anybody want this? Yes, please. Okay, I see a couple of those. So this is called my flow log dashboard old because, it has to be customized. But like it has like the poker scores and stuff in there. So anyway, I will stick this in the Slack and just watch me now and you'll see where it is if you want it. I'm going to do it in Docs, Charts, and Indicators. And yeah, okay. Master of XLS for trade logging. That should describe it pretty good. All right, so that is there. And so, the other thing you can even do, and this is what that student did, is she put together this, this part of the process, and then I had her do this. And then what we did was we took that trade log and we just put it on another tab. So one was this, and then one was, well, I moved that, so we don't need that anymore. But let me just put that back. So, and then so we just had another tab that was, in fact, this. So that's an easy way to do that too. But whatever works for you, you don't do it my way. Do it any way that works. That's all I would care about if I was you. Okay, any other questions, comments about that? I still have one or two other little things I'm going to talk about. And then we're open office hours. So for 15 or 20 minutes, if there's any other questions, I will take them. All right, let's see. Post your questions if you have them, and I'm just going to kind of go on to my next stuff. What was the thing I want? Oh, by the way, I posted this in our group too, but if you have not listened to this chat with traders, I have a really high opinion of Linda, and she says some really useful stuff for you newbies in this session. So, listen to it in the car or whatever, particularly ladies, Amy, Maria, etc. Women have a slightly different mental structure than we do, and Linda is the world's expert on that, and she mentions it in little tiny bits and pieces. So that's worth considering too. Okay. Questions or comments about this part? So, let me go back to the kind of agenda of this part and review and spaghetti brains. Some of the best traders, a good female trader is usually better than most men. But they're rare. Good female traders are rare. Number one, because a lot of women don't go into trading. But women generally will, believe it or not, trade less emotionally. They tend to follow rules better. Yeah, better dealing with multiple inputs. Yeah, they are. And if you ask anybody who's coached large amounts of traders like I have, Lee has, Pete, we will all say the same thing. Ultimately, the best traders that we have in our groups are typically the standout women. Anyway, and why guys tend to be bad? Guys tend to be bad because we think we're right. I swear to God, if you can eliminate that one part of maleness, and it's genetic because we're supposed to, lead the pack and protect the women and, all that misogynistic nonsense. Yeah, it's about ego. I agree, Lee. Okay, so again, you've got this kind of 6,000, 10,000 foot view of your process, which is this piece. And then you've kind of got the actual, making it happen part, which is taking your setups and putting them into, literally, this is your day as a trader. And, and if you get really good and you only trade the open, your day is an hour and then you got the rest of your day to yourself. And you know what? That is not unrealistic. I hear the gurus talking about all the time. It's unrealistic to do it using guru techniques, but using our techniques and true real trader techniques, it is not hard to do that once you develop your skill. So we start there, and then we get to the granularity of the time of day and the specific setups. And then it really just becomes about managing yourself. And by the way, you'll be learning on how to do that and reading books and going to seminars about the emotional side of this for your entire trading career, because you just have to keep practicing that and keep learning new stuff. And Steenberger has some really good seminars that are fun to go to or listen to. And so anyway, going back to our kind of agenda here, at the beginning I said the bit about mentoring that I wanted to, and I'm going to repeat that right now. I intend to break this group of 55 down into 2 subgroups. After we conclude the workshop in January, beginning of January, there will be some group of mentees who I will work with by invitation. I don't have any idea beyond that how that will be structured. I've spoken with a few of you already. That might be a group of 10 maybe. And those are the people that are really putting the time in and working hard on this and talking with others and sharing, stuff with other traders and showing critical thinking skills. And, that's all the stuff that everybody benefits from. Anybody who does that is an asset to the group collectively. That word I keep saying, gestalt, that's a gestalt group. It's a mastermind group because the individuals collectively are more than just the sum of the parts. So that's the purpose of doing that. If you're interested, participate and reach out to me and we'll talk. Don't be insulted if I tell you you're not ready. Most of you are not ready. But you may be ready, down the road or whatever. And that there are no closed doors there. It's nothing like that. I'm just starting to share with you guys the stuff that I have been thinking about what to do next. That's all. And I'm wide open to any suggestions any of you have. Structure, costs, do we do it in Slack? Do we get just for the mentees? Do we get a little Discord? I have no idea. I'm wide open. I want it to be really simple for us to interact and share our impressions of what we're seeing, as well as for you guys to, improve your skills. And then ultimately, I'd love to find a trading partner. That's someone that I can interact with on a daily basis about, my stuff. Some of you may end up there. We'll see. Okay, so that was the second thing, or the first thing rather. The second thing is just, a caveat on the footprint discussion. Don't go chasing, more tools. You have plenty of tools. Get good at your skills. And, then you can go look for new footprint formats or whatever, as stuff comes. Look, new stuff comes out all the time. And Jigsaw didn't exist 5 years ago. So, you want to be actively, looking at what the new stuff is, but you also don't want to lose sight of the fact that you're here to make a living, a lot of it, a lot of money. And the more time you spend looking for the Holy Grail, the less time you will spend learning how to execute the Holy Grail. So that was the second item. The third item is that I have put these forms up and I just added that last one to it. And then lastly, I truly think that this mechanism here that I shared with you today is the way to get yourselves through those issues, like transitioning from scalping to intraday swings, or getting in sync with the market, and all that. The time of day setup index, that's what I call this. The Playbook best setups by time of day. It's an indexing of those two things. And obviously I need to clean up my sizes and stuff here now that I reintegrated these, and I'll do that. So I may end up leaving this way. I kind of like it. Whoops, didn't want to do that. So questions about anything. I'm transitioning now to office hours, so you may ask me anything about anything. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. Good, John. Awesome. John, you're a really classic example of the audience that, thank you, Pavel, thank you. You're a really classic example, John. There's a number of you, but you're one that just comes to mind right away. Greg is another one. And you guys have had a lot of, education, and a lot about different parts of the market. But it's like Pete has said, with his group therapy, you just never could figure out how to put it all together and consistently be profitable. And that's what this stuff we're doing right now is all about. This is really where the gold is, because it's not something that would just naturally occur to you. And at the same time, unless you're skilled at systems design, and I've told you over and over again in my tiny little ego that systems design is something that I am really fucking good at, like this kind of stuff. So you know what? I don't mind doing it, and when it's appropriate like this to do it, I will. And so, you guys should all embrace that and take advantage of it when I can share it with you, because it's certainly one of my skills. And again, that's like, with the mastermind or mentoring group, others of you have different skills you can bring in. Like, I'm quite certain that that Lee's a better programmer than I, just based on talking to him. And, and he's also dug into Sierra Chart. And Sierra Chart's a really good conversation because, if you want to pick a fight with another order flow trader, just, go out on Twitter and say, Ninja Trader 8 is better than Sierra. Change my mind. I mean, you'll have an argument for the next 3 weeks with 10,000 people both ways, okay? Because it's one of those things. People are pretty passionate about their opinions. So, you want to kind of find your Bubba. I mean, my Bubba's in Ninja. I'm aware of the advantages of Sierra and some other platforms. I actually think Market Delta is a really, really good platform. It's just, they originally developed the footprint and whatnot, but haven't looked at them lately, but they used to be just absurdly expensive, so it just wasn't worth it. But they're the guys, if I'm not mistaken, correct me, this may have changed, but Market Delta were the ones that also owned, these are all people selling the licenses. You might know, Lee, do they still own the, what's his name? Stedelmayer's Market Profile. Do they still own it? They were used to be the exclusive licensees, and everyone else, they stopped operations. Okay, so who bought that? Who bought their assets? Does anyone know? No one did, really. All right, we'll have to talk more about that offline, because they used to be like the premier platform there, and I can understand they went out of business. They were too expensive. But oh, cool. All right, we'll have to talk. Yeah, because then it became, the original professional platform was XTrader, which is TT's product, and I traded XTrader through the 2000s, and that's why I developed an ADL. But yeah, Lee and I were going to talk this week and talk about what's going to happen next. And yeah, no, I understand that. I know the guys at Investor RT, and that's who I licensed it from. So, I get, oh, cool. All right. I just don't know what happened after that. I went away from Investor RT in 2012. So that's I'm caught up to that point, Lee. So I know all the stories about it then. Yeah. And at that point, I was actually using Thinkorswim and MT4. Those were, and I also was using, there was a platform I really liked that one of my introducing brokers had that was called Turbo Trader. Remember that? It didn't do order flow or anything like that, but just for quick scalping, it was useful. Okay. Yes. And by the way, a couple of you have asked me about this too. Are Lee and I going to work together at all on his excellent stuff? After the workshop, and the answer is yes. We've talked. We haven't figured out how yet, but we've exchanged a lot of emails and conversations, and there's clearly some synergies between what he does and what I do. If you listen to any of Lee's presentations and on his YouTube videos, they're very professional and very. He's running a business, and then you look at my stuff, and I'm just like, hey, if you don't like it, fuck off. And when I did it as a business, I did it more like Lee did. But there's arguments in favor of both. So anyway, okay. So that's our agenda part. Which now we're at open hours office discussion, and basically, any questions? Okay, here's one. Talking the pros and cons of trading like I do across 4 or 5 markets at any given time. Oh, that is a great question, Steve Weber. And yeah, Merritt, he's mostly an oil trader. He trades the RTY as well. But you have to understand, most of the ways he makes money have nothing to do with what he trades. He's a principal in SMB, and so he's going to be developing other traders. That's how he will grow his career, which is why he has classes and mentors people, and they have workshops over there at SMB. So the answer to your question, it's what he does is a little different, but it's also thinking about where he is. If I was his age, he's younger than me, and wanted to do education, then I would be more focused like that. And so back to the answer to your question, if I were you, Steve, or I were you, any of you, I would not be trying to trade as many instruments as Jeff does. I would focus on two things only. I would focus on the indexes, and basically that's one instrument. Don't think of that as being 4 instruments. With very rare exceptions, there's no good reasons to trade YM or RTY, and I've explained some cases where there are good reasons, but for the workshop, I won't elaborate on that. But ES and NQ give you 2 flavors of the same situation every day, and there's more than enough opportunity there all by itself, except every now and then there's like a crazy move in oil, like it moves $5 in one day, 15% or whatever, and gold does some similar things. So if I were you, Steve, what I would do is I would trade the indexes, and then I would pick either oil or gold, probably oil. And I wouldn't necessarily try to trade it all the time, but I would kind of keep an eye on the momentum trades that you can get in oil, because just look at any of the crazy days that we've had in the oil markets. I think there's some charts back here in the oil that I posted a couple of, the crazy Ivans, this kind of stuff goes on. And, so let's say you saw a drop like this and you weren't in it when it had, you weren't already short. Okay. Then I would just be watching this on the dome, just waiting for an opportunity to buy it, and so, this is a 30-second chart. On the tick chart, you would have seen a spring form in here. And, look at it, just do the math here real quick. Okay, let's say this happened and you chased it all the way up to 20 before you actually got in. It actually bounced much lower than that. So let's say you were long at 58.20 and you rode it only half of the distance to the goal line, call it 58.50. That's 30 ticks. That's $300 on one contract. And this happens all the time in oil. So that's the answer to your question. Here's another one. That's you. Hey, look at that. So you're on the right track, Steve. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff you just grab those trades. And but is that a bread and butter trading for a rookie? Yeah, it could be. If you look at Lee's story, that's what he did. With getting funded by OneUp, you just focus on one instrument and scalping it, and that's totally legit. So it depends on you, but pros and cons. It's better. The pros, it's better to focus on as little as possible. That's always true. Less is always more. So, and that has to be the number one thing in your head all the time. Let's see. I'm going to show you another example of that right now. As I was doing this. Okay, yeah. I was screwing around with the footprint chart in Ninja 8, just the native one, and I kind of had this stuff going, and it was making sense for what I wanted to do. And then Lee and I were talking about the advantages of seeing the bid-ask viewpoint, and there's clearly are some for that. I don't disagree with that. So I start screwing around with it again, and ultimately where I ended up was with this, the one I finally shared. That what, for what I'm doing with footprints, that high volume thing that which is also in Jigsaw, same concept of kind of throwing a high volume indicator on where they occur, and you can set how you did that. And the way I have that set is, if it's constantly high volume back and forth on the bid and the ask, that's typical at inflection points. So that was, and everything here I've got, this cool little delta thing that, I don't like to look at statistics while I trade, but that's a really good, quick way to do it right there is, just the delta of the bar and the cumulative delta. You can see inflection points real clearly. And, and then the cool thing about the way that this cumulative delta works is it does both a cumulative delta and a bar delta. So you don't need both of those. You can kind of see both at once. So that was why I chose to do that. And again, the moral of the story, Steve, is always do less is more. Keep it as simple as you can. And you can always make it more complicated, right? And because we all, traders tend to be mathematical, odds kind of people, we tend to, like lots of information. And I would encourage you to avoid that, at least, while you're developing your bubbas. Try to keep it as simple as you can, everything. Okay, so let's see. Did I answer your question, Steve? Did that help? Good. Okay. And it might be a good question to ask Lee privately as well, because what he did with oil, I know a lot of people have done that with oil. So that there are arguments both ways. I think my opinion, and I don't know that Lee would disagree with this or that anybody would. In the long run, it's best if you have a couple of different families of instruments. That give you opportunity all the time. If the indexes are dead, I can always find a trade in oil and gold. And, and if the indexes are going all down at once, usually gold's going up. You get what I'm saying. So it's not hard to find opportunities with this combination. But back, even as little as 3 years ago, I was just doing the indexes and occasionally gold or oil. I didn't trade gold at all until 2018. Never, literally. 2018 was my first gold trade ever. So. I saw opportunity there and I decided it was time to play. Okay, let's see. So I got that one. Okay, Amy, cool. All right. I don't know what that little symbol was, but I assume it was. Have a good luck moving and all that. I get that world, Amy. I told you a couple of months a year I live in a cabin in the mountains, and it's kind of my. If you're familiar with Walden by Henry David Thoreau. The idea of being on Walden Pond. I do that once a year. Okay. By the way, my absolute favorite essay on the planet is called Walking, which is by Henry David Thoreau. And there's a free version of it out on the internet. And I strongly recommend you guys read this because it's just a really cool thing. I wish to speak a word for nature, for absolute freedom and wildness, as contrasted with a freedom and culture merely civil. To regard man as an inhabitant, part and parcel of nature, rather than a member of society. God, this is just so good. I wish to make an extreme statement, if so I may make an emphatic one. For there's enough champions of civilizations, the ministers, the school committee, every one of you will take care. The genius of taking walks, of sauntering. This is just so good. Anyway, read it, guys. Learn it. Love it. It's a trading philosophy. Yes, northern New Hampshire. Yeah, I've lived all over the world in places like that, so I'm fortunate. I lived in North Carolina in the woods. I lived in New England in the woods. I lived in the woods in China. That was an interesting experience. Literally. And my Mandarin is not very good. Neither is my Cantonese. So anyway, okay. Bar, could I comment on the first hour? Oh, the correlation. Yeah. Okay. There are basically a couple of patterns within let me see if I've got enough examples here in Open 5. I think I do. What typically you want to look for, these are the old chart format I don't want to use. This is probably as good a one as any. Yeah, Bhutan is beautiful. Yes, that is true. Okay, so there's really two ways, and I talked about this a lot in the last session. So Bar, that might... all right, take care, Amy. Good luck with everything. So there's really just kind of two ways that I interpret it. If the Open 5 is below the first hour, I'm looking for a trend day in that direction. Likewise, if the Open 5 is at the top of the first hour, in other words, the opposite of this, I'm looking for a trend that way. But the vast majority of days don't look like that. They look in some format or another like this, where, you know, we launch up and then the first hour is formed and then it becomes a range day. So this level of information here is much less important than this level of information. That's what I mean when I say, Bar, that the first hour high is greater than the open 5, or, you know, that's what I mean right here. I'm saying that the information I have at this point is much more important than this. For example, you know, we had an open 5 that turned into just a ridiculous long, right? And so a lot of traders would have misinterpreted this as a trend day. And it's easy to see why. But you cannot have a trend day unless it goes past the first hour. And if it turns there, then you have this setup almost every day where it reverts into being in the range. And that's why I say the very huge, vast majority, I mean, north of 70% of days will be some sort of range day structure. So if you understand the relationship of the open 5 to that first hour, you can often get a real good idea what's going to happen the rest of the day. So I hope that answers your question, Bar. That's what I was talking about there. Okay, so let's see. On greater than or more, there's definitely something to different ways to filter and interpret it. Do you encourage you to break down to context indicators and execution indicators? Yeah, that's one way you could certainly approach that, Kuika. That's kind of the idea that I do here, and with, you know, that old iteration of that I had with this, was I was kind of trying to do both of those things. And this is kind of the best result I've had, this thing that I just shared with you, this playbook thing, because it kind of keeps you, yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Context information, execution information. You know, they really are sort of different. And this is context stuff. And execution's really more about the time of the day, and, you know, and really getting down into the actual order flow itself. You know, and I go to the dome for that. So, you know, once I'm at one of these points, the only thing I care about is what's going on the dome, and I get all the information I want, you know, with the exception of maybe the, you know, the ledge trade right here, you know, and then, you know, I might go take a look at the footprint or what have you. So I think it gives you a really cool structure to kind of work your way through the day, you know, and that's the intention. So I hope that makes some sense. And I think that's a good way to put it, Lee. All right. So, oh, you're welcome. I hope, you know, look, I've learned a lot doing this. I've perfected some of my stuff, and it made me think about it from the point of view of, you know, somebody that hadn't been looking at it for the last 40 years or whatever. But, you know, really, what's important is that you integrate it into yourself and what works for you, and test stuff. Which question are you referring to, David? I'm looking back and trying to see. If you have two or more, oh, is this, okay. I'll come back to yours, Darren. Which, let's see. Let me look back to your, hold on. Can you repeat it? I don't see the question you're referring to. Oh, wait a minute. What's the best way to soak in this knowledge? That one? Okay, so yeah, that's the one. Okay. I'm going to copy your question so that we repeat it. And okay, so this is what he's asking me, guys. Okay, what I would do with that is, number one, get your charts set up in just the simplest, most basic way that works for you, and then stop fucking with your charts. So that's the first thing, David. You know, too many people want to play with their charts all the time. You know, if you're at that point in order flow, you know, don't even worry about footprints or any other crap. Just get it set up and then get in there and start doing drills. That's my answer to your question. So you're on the right track. Get in there and do drills and practice. And, you know, I'd be doing that for a couple of months at least. Seriously. And then the next, you know, as you do that, more and more of this stuff will start to make sense. You know, you'll be doing drills overnight and you'll realize, God, he's right. You know, it's totally different than it is during the day. And, you know, so a lot of this will kind of take care of itself for you. So I hope that, I'm going to answer your question in a second, Darren. I'm just doing more housekeeping. Okay, and then that allows me to make this littler and make that bigger. Okay. Darren, if you have two or more accounts, how do you suggest managing when to trade those, incorporating the compound? Oh, that is a really good question. Yeah, no, I get that, David. I totally get that too. And you just, hey, do as much as you can. Look, you might get to the point where, let me read, okay. Yes, yes. Remember, not only do I recommend doing the chart, I'm getting rid of the charts and just watching the dome. Remember what I said? I'd even take the prices off the domes and I would just watch order flow. So yes, that I totally agree with that. That's the right answer. Look, remember what I say over and over again, okay? I don't say this stuff over and over again for my health. I say it over and over again because I want you guys to understand the logic behind it. There's a really, really, really important reason why my why my setup looks like this with the domes in the middle and the charts on the side. During the day, I often turn these off or turn the monitors off on the side. I don't pay much attention. My focus is on the order flow action. This just gives me context, or, if I get to an order flow point like the top of a ledge and I want a footprint to give me an idea whether, buyers or sellers are getting trapped up there, or, there's unfinished business or, unfinished auctions or whatever, then that's a tool that's useful for that instance. That's the way I do it. Okay. So I want to go back to Darren's question. So if I have two or more accounts, how do I suggest managing those, incorporating that with the combine? Okay. The way that I would do that is based on your business plan, Darren, and it's going to be different for everybody. So, I know your situation. I'll just kind of use you as an example. So, you have a profession, obviously you do fairly well at that, and, you're in your 40s somewhere. So, what you're planning on doing with Top Stuff's money, correct me if I'm wrong, is, you're kind of building up your trade others people's money world. And if that's the business plan, then, I would practice in your individual account with one lots and tick drills and stuff like that. I would make every effort to get funded with as much money as possible with somebody like Top Step or One Up or whoever, with the idea that that's really where I'm going to go to trade. And then I'm going to take profits out of there and put them into my personal accounts. And then as I grow my personal accounts, I'll start taking more risk in my personal accounts and doing more of the things that I do in my Top Step account where I have enough money and I can afford to do those things. So did that answer your question, Darren? Or is that the beginning of the answer to your question? And then I will comment on the comments that people have made. What Lee is saying here is another way to do it. Yeah, you have to pay pro CME fees. By the way, the other funding firms that don't do that are breaking the law. They're breaking the rules of the exchange. They will not be able to continue to only charge you personal data rates, and I think OneUp has been doing that, or Learn to Trade, or one of those guys, and they advertise that they do that. The CME has already come down on them, threatening to fine them. So just so you know, that is not reality, that any prop firm has to charge real charges for data. If you open your own account, you can lie and say you're not professional, but the bottom line is ultimately in any professional account, you're going to pay professional fees. So, Lee got started on it here, but, what he says is certainly one way to approach. And if you're going to trade oil, definitely want to trade that with, carefully with Top Step, but also, because oil is so crazy, it might be you're better off there because you can afford to lose, right? Because it's not really your money yet. So yeah, that's right, Darren. You really you have to think about your business plan. If you're, let's say you're one of the other people, I won't name them, but there's another person in this group that is doing like the 30,000 or 50,000, and their objective is to just get a couple $100 a day out of that. Well, then you should just be funneling that into your personal account. You shouldn't be trading your personal account at all until you get 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 grand in it, and just pay the split, give them their 20%, and just keep making money with whoever your partner is as you build up capital without the risk of your capital being in the market. You know, look, the beauty of other people's money, everybody, is that it feels different. You still have fear and greed, but there's a buffer, there's an insulator, you know, and I know Lee and, you know, other people will agree with that. That's really the value of other people's money, you know, and that you can build up your own money. But I will say to you, and I don't know if Lee's far enough along in his trading career to feel this way, but maybe he can comment after I say this. For me, the only things I do in my personal accounts are the things that I know work to build my equity. And so the only reason that I'm out in the other people's money world is when I want to lower my risk. So, you know, if I'm trying to come up with a new model for trading the ES with 100 lots, you know, I'm going to do that with a partner where, you know, we can both have the risk and then the rewards. And then as that's successful, I'll extract profits from that and I'll put them in my personal account, you know, where I do things that I know only work. You know, for example, if I do the 10K a day challenge, I'm going to come back to your comment in a second, Maria. That's a great comment. If I do the 10K a day challenge, and by the way, that 10K a day challenge can be anything between 5K and 20K. I haven't figured out exactly yet. My health is a concern. But the idea is to use as few contracts as possible to make as much money as possible and to do it for a year. So like my original objective had been to do 2 million with 15 lots, or 150,000 if you use Top Steps. You know, and then I might end up doing, you know, 10 lots and 5,000 or 7,500 instead. I don't know. I'm concerned about the impact it's going to have on my health. But could I do the same thing with my own money? Could I afford it? Well, of course. I mean, I can do it with my own money, but the whole point is not to, because that's part of the challenge. I mean, it will be my own money because I'll be splitting it with whoever I do it with. And I've talked to Top and a few other prop firms about doing it publicly and promoting it. And I don't know. We'll see when we actually do it what happens. But that's kind of the thinking there. Okay, Maria, you are more responsible with other people's money. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that, you know, the thing I like about other people's money is it's both of those. I'm not only more responsible, but I'm also more comfortable. You know, for example, that day that I showed you that I was trading and I lost $3,000. Again, you know, in my account, that's a rounding error, but it's still $3,000, all right? Now, I'm much more comfortable doing that kind of thing in a partner account with a prop firm, a Top Step, or anybody. You know, even though I only get 80% of the profits, it just is. That's why I say it's my development environment. It's just easier to lose money there. And, you know, even the sim there to me is more valuable than my own sim because it's more accountable. I mean, if I lose $3,000 and 1 penny in my own sim, it doesn't mean anything. If I lose $3,000 and a penny in a Top Step sim, I broke a rule. And, you know, again, you can penalize yourself or tear $100 bill in half like Lee suggests, whatever. Those things work. And so doing them is something you want to make sense, you know, you want to consider. It will make you better. Okay, let's see. Do you advise how to have an observation system to record data? Ooh, that's a really, really, really good question, Philippe. What I do is I have two things. I have a trade log, and that looks like this. And I only do that when I'm testing setups. Otherwise, I just don't care about that. I'm good enough at keeping track of my errors that I don't need to do this. However, when I'm developing a new setup, I do this. And I also keep a diary. And this might be more what you're talking about. And it's literally just, you know, that sheet that I showed you with the day on it. And I just scribble notes while the day is going. You know, like, wow, the first hour high has been sold every day this week, but today it got bought, you know, and stuff like that. So, and I just scribble that stuff down. And at the end of the day, if there's anything relevant on that piece of paper, I scan it into a little notes database so that I can, you know, index it and search it, you know, 5 years from now. So that's how I solve that problem. There's a lot of ways to solve that. And one of the things that I recommend if you are using the Jigsaw products is Journalytics has really good tools to be able to do that. You know, you can literally just go in there and talk to yourself and it will record notes and keywords for you. You know, that's this platform here, which is a component of Jigsaw. It links to DayTrader. And Anyway, you can see I've got all kinds of test shit going on in here, but it has really cool, it has profit seeking tools, that will give you all kinds of metrics on your trades, long, short. It's a really cool tool. And it has a journal that will, you can literally just talk and make notes and keyword stuff. And it has all kinds of MAE, all the stuff you need is there. So, oh, and as I mentioned before, it has a playbook, so you can put your setups in there and then, just tag them as you do them. I think this is a really cool tool. I'm just now getting to the point, where I'm going to start integrating it with what I do. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you. Good. All right. You know what? That's fine, David. Too many people do the combines and they aren't ready for them. There's a number of people right here in this group right now that are in combines that I think they started too fast. I mean, they're just so anxious to get funded. They didn't wait till they learned all the stuff I had to teach them, for a couple of weeks. And, fine, if you're in one, go for it. But, this should be an example to you all, just today, just this simple thing right here, that there's a lot you've never even heard before about this business. So don't be in such a fucking hurry. Okay, let's see. Yeah, Darren, that's a really good, and even when you get to the point where you have six figures, Darren, I do. I have more than six figures. I still I still like to trade other people's money for certain things, like like the 10K challenge I was talking about. I can afford to do that myself, but number one, I want somebody to help me promote it. If I do it, I want to, I want the accountability of doing it publicly, and number two, it's monetizable if I do it that way. There's a guy that wrote a book on $1 million challenge a few years ago. That's a really good book. And also, just Top Steps community has, 15,000 people in it. So, if I just threw up a website and did that on the website, you can probably sell advertising. I don't know. Those are all kind of things that, I don't like to worry about, but they can make doing stuff like that pay for itself. And so that's kind of where I'm at. So, and I wasn't doing, 10 years ago is a good example, Darren, of, where you're going to be in a couple of years. I had enough money to trade my own money, and I pretty much did. But every now and then I'd partner with somebody in one way or another, maybe on just one thing. I have partnerships with some guys in China. I call them the Brahmin. I have a trading partnership that runs a little fund in Beijing, and there's four partners, and the other three are all Chinese, and I know them from various business things and whatnot. And one of them, literally, he calls himself the Brahmin. He's the child of a very wealthy industrialist. He has $1 billion trust fund, and interacting with guys like that is a really good way to practice that mentality. I mean, think about, why would that guy ever want to use other people's money, and yet he does, if that makes some sense. Okay. MDMA, yeah, really. No, I truly don't think you should ever close the door to other people's money. Look, Darren, here's a possible. Let's say, you start trading your own money and, you're successful and you have a decade of success, documentable. By the way, that's what it takes to trade anybody else's money, real money, You can get six figures with less than that. If you're talking about going out and getting 7 digits of other people's money, you'll need a 10-year track record. And, if you're going to form a hedge fund and all that. But boy, if you have a 10-year record with your own money, or, in combination with Top Steps money, you may decide, when you turn, 50 or 55 or whatever, that hell, I'm going to do that. And, put together the prospectus. Here's what I'm going to trade, raise some money. You could take that $1 million and turn it into 100 million. And that's the idea. So, oh, that's totally true, Lee. That is exactly what I do with Top Step right there. That's, platforms. I spent most of 2018 and early 2019, as many of you saw, testing Trade-Evade and TS Trader using Top Step because I really like the idea of the low commissions. The only time I've ever had commissions as low as Trade-Evade's is when I leased a seat on the exchange, and I could trade a round trip for $1. I'm not exaggerating. Boy, that's nice. All in. exchange fees and everything. You know, you know, if you do trade a lot of volume, it makes sense to get that kind of, you know, get a seat or lease one or lease access to one or whatever. But, you know, absent that, you know, the prop firms and somebody like Top Step are the absolute best ways to do that. So, all right, other questions. It's almost 11, which I guess makes this a 2 hours, which is what I like to keep them to, but I will answer questions as long as we have them. Oh, this is very true. What Lee just said is also a good comment. Yeah, you know, if you have a lot of money under management, and this is something Linda talks about, Linda Rasky, is, you know, the better you get, the harder it is, because, you know, you can't just go into the market and do HMOMO trades when, you know, when you have $1 billion fund, because 10 lots aren't going to do it. You're not going to make enough money to impact the fund. However, Lee, the other side of that is if you have 100 million under management, you get the 2% management fee typically. So you're making a really nice $2 million living doing nothing but, you know, running the money. So, you know, there's pros and cons to this stuff. And again, the right answer, no matter how old you are, oh really? Oh, we'll have to talk. I get approached frequently and I generally tell them to fuck off, but maybe we could figure out one together. You know, I did do that with another guy who is an old friend who has a swing trading site. He and I took our swing trading and future scalping skills and combined them, and we did some trading, you know, for a fund. We were hired guns. It was great. I made a lot of money, had a lot of fun. So yeah, you and I need to talk more, Lee. We might definitely be able to find some synergy for you or me or both of us. And for the rest of you, that's out there. You just got to know that will happen. You know, the more your reputation goes, and, you know, and it also depends on, you know, what you're trying to do. You know, there are definitely a number of different personalities in the trading world. And, you know, there's some very conservative, and I don't mean, you know, conservative like, you know, conservative versus liberal. I mean conservative like, you know, blue blood, old money, you know, you would never say fuck in a webinar kind of people. And there's some really good opportunities to manage their money, but they like more convention. And rarely will you see that kind of money coming into the futures market unless it already has its own, you know, hedge fund or private equity fund. And then there's a bunch of folks out there who are, oh, for lack of a better word, one of the reasons that income inequality is so bad right now is that there's a lot of instant big money on a scale that is historically unprecedented. You know, it used to take generations to build up wealth, you know, billion-dollar wealth, and now, you know, you can form a tech startup and make it, even if the company is a total piece of shit like the WeWork guy, and get $1 billion cash out. So the point is that, you know, it's distorted the playing field a little bit, and at the same time, those same people are good people to invest in speculative speculative ventures. So I'll give you one simple example of that. You know, as you know, I'm active in the venture capital community. When Lyft and Uber went public in San Francisco, the day the public offerings hit, there were 3,500 new millionaires in San Francisco, which is astonishing. Some of them worth way more than $1 million. I mean, 100 million in some cases. All right. Now, some of that was restricted. Some of it wasn't, you know, meaning they had to wait to sell their stock. And, you know, and Uber went down, Lyft went down. Maybe it's not all that much now. It's still ridiculously large amounts of money. So imagine how that impacts something like a property market in San Francisco. There aren't 3,000 homes for sale. There's about 700 at any given moment in that entire area. So these guys could literally go in and buy everything on the market all at once. And so, you know, I'm in a situation like that now. A friend of mine has a property up here in the Santa Barbara Mountains. It's 44 acres and has a couple of different houses on it, and a chicken. I housed it up there. If you look at my Instagram, you'll see some pictures of it. It's a gorgeous property. And he's older, and he's older than me even. He's mid 70s. And we're looking at selling that property. And the trouble, the conventional realtors don't understand any of it. They just think, oh, it's a nice house on a, you know, a rural kind of hobby farm, you could call it, or, you know, hobby ranch or gentleman's ranch, they used to call them. But it's so far from that, because he has 3 of 10 tiny homes on his property that are rented to like young millennial people that have all kinds of cool businesses. And, you know, you could develop this into a really neat kind of, you know, collaborative ranch out in the Santa Monica Mountains. And if you do that, the property's worth close to $10 million. And if you sell it as a house, it's worth about 3.5, maybe 4 million. So it's really important. The moral of that story, and the thing I said before with respect to other people's money, is that you will always be able to find opportunities if you're skilled and have a track record. But make sure the people you deal with have similar risk tolerance and objectives to you. You know, that's why someone like Top Step's a really good trading partner. They understand that space. And, you know, and your mother-in-law is not a good person to borrow 50 grand from to go trade. She won't understand what you're doing or the risk and the reward. So that's kind of my point there. MDMA is a good symbol to get to 6 figures. Hey, the nose spray is coming out, isn't it? Oh, wait, no, that's mushrooms. That's right. That's. By the way, you know, just speaking of the Gobi Desert, Darren, I am a huge proponent of microdosing things like psilocybin mushrooms and LSD and cannabinoids and all that. And I'm extremely knowledgeable about that stuff, and I have investments in a number of ventures in that space. So if anybody ever wants to talk about that stuff, but you know, I've shared this with you guys all before. I am a daily user of cannabinoids, and that is the only medication I use for pain. In other words, CBD and THC. And I am right, you know, as far as any of you are concerned right now, I am stoned right at this moment, but it doesn't affect me that way. I mean, I'm not sitting here with a box of donuts. I mean, it affects me by allowing me to function when I'm in pain. So yeah, mushrooms, again, I've used both LSD and mushrooms in my life, and I can tell you that, and Steve Jobs shares this in his book, it was a life-changing experience every single time. And in terms of my abilities in business, my philosophy, how often I got depressed, I mean, you know, and so there's a really good example. If you say that to somebody who's really quote unquote conservative, they won't even listen to this conversation. You know, they still want to make, you know, that marijuana illegal because people are, you know, smoking that and then going around murdering everyone, you know, reefer madness kind of, you know. And that's the trouble with the United States, particularly as a country, is there's just so much blatant archaic stupidity out in the sticks. And, you know, and at the same time, you know, we're like 100 different countries, and, you know, Europe solves this differently because they're much smaller and compressed together. But, you know, that's a political example, but that's true in your business too. And it's really important to keep that in mind. You know, I don't know if Amy's still here. Amy, did you leave? Yeah, okay, Amy left. Amy and I have butted heads politically a couple of times, and I'm sure she'll hear this when it goes back. So I'm not talking on the recording. I'm not talking about this without her here, but Amy's very conservative politically, and you know, we've butted heads a lot about, you know, the idiot in office right now. And you know, she mentioned something in one of the webinars, and I just jumped on her like a ton of bricks, because on that one she was actually economically wrong. And, you know, in that case, I will have a debate with somebody. You know, I won't just argue with someone whether, you know, politics in this party or that party is good or bad, because I don't think it works like that. I think there are ideas that are good and bad, and I think the problem with this whole party thing is that, you know, there's no middle. And I also think that you should have to take a test to vote. You know, the old citizenship tests people coming to the country here have to take, because they have to learn how the system actually works. Americans don't have to do that, and most of them have no idea how our system works. So anyway, it's the same thing when you deal with other people's money. That's my point here. You know, make sure you're compatible with the people or you'll be miserable. All righty, let's see. Any other questions or comments or topics? This is open hours, office hours. We will talk about anything, you know. Somebody asked me privately, and I spoke with them, one of the persons in this group, but I'll give you another thing, you know. Look, this is my life story in one sentence. I told you I was born in Palos Verdes, which is a fairly affluent community, so I grew up privileged. My father invented toys and was an executive for Mattel. And so, you know, we were reasonably well off, but my father, you know, it was a child of the Depression, had to quit college to put his sister through law school and never graduated. So, you know, you want a car, you know, save your money and go buy a car. And my neighbors, you know, got Porsches. And that was a really cool upbringing because, you know, it gave me, I understood the value of you know, what my father had accomplished. And my classmates and neighborhood mates didn't. Because, you know, they had trust funds. I did not have a trust fund. I don't have a trust fund. But 50 to now more like 75% of the classmates in high school had trust funds. And so literally all they had to do was go to college and make it to 21, and they had nothing to worry about for the rest of their lives. And I tell you what, that is the most dangerous and destructive thing to society ever. You know, it's the same thing as like royalty. And luckily the British were smart enough to figure out that the Queen is ceremonial and shouldn't actually run the country. Because, you know, people having their country be run by their children is a really bad idea, Mr. Trump. So anyway, that's my point. That you know, you need to find those correct synergies in everything you do in your business, and you know, in life too. That's true. So, hey, my first job was delivering newspapers for the PV News, and I was supposed to ride my bicycle. I was 12, but since I raced motocross, I had some really cool Suzuki racing bikes. So I used to deliver the papers on my motorcycle, and I got in trouble for doing that. But hey, yeah, that's and that led me to flipping motorcycles. So I'd buy used motorcycles, fix them up, and then sell them for more money. And I parlayed that into a car when I was 16. I bought a Firebird 400 HO, and I souped that up and started racing it. And I started making money racing at the strip. We had a drag strip in Southern California near my house called Lions Drag Strip. If you're from Southern California, you might remember it, or Ascot. And I raced what is called bracket racing with my 600 horsepower Firebird 400 HO, and did pretty well with that. And then I kept racing motocross and went to college. Anyway, where I'm going with this is, so I graduated from college, went to work for IBM, and was trading my own account. So I was doing well as a professional and making a good living. And then my body started having issues. I told you I had a stroke when I was 27. The medical costs of that forced me into a bankruptcy before I was 30 because our system sucks. Oh, and by the way, I was married to a Brit and had access to the British healthcare system at the time, but I was too stupid to take advantage of it. And now I no longer do, and I wish I did. It's so much better. But anyway, so your trading career is going to be long. That's why I'm telling you all this. And you know, you may go bankrupt in there. You may have a health problem. You know, I broke my back a bunch of times racing motorcycles and crashing race cars, and you know, you just kind of ebb and flow with it too. And so it's really important to kind of keep your mission straight and your objectives straight. And for a guy like you, David, who's young, and you know, you got a long time to do this. So just learn to make the right decisions at each decision point. Would be my advice to you. You know, get really good at critical thinking. So when you have an opportunity, you don't make the wrong decisions, because that's kind of the path you'll follow. Yeah, tax season's an interesting time. That used to impact more. Let me come back to there's some great questions here. Does smoking help me trade? I assume you're talking about cannabis, cannabinoids, and CBDs, and I will answer that very honestly and directly. Yes, if it's the right strains. Again, I'm really, really knowledgeable on cannabinoids. Sativa strains of certain ones make me really focused. And yesterday I was able to code and do configurations and stuff in Ninja for 8 hours straight. You know, other than getting up to stretch my back, I never lost my focus, and that's because of that. And you know, I think there's a lot of value to those substances, but they're very individual. So you have to really figure out what works for you, you know. CBD is a really good anxiotic, and it also, in my case, is a good anti-inflammatory. I actually make CBD preparations myself. I grow the plants and extract the oil, and I make both topical and edible CBD oils. And that's one of the businesses I'm involved in Colorado and here. Okay, let's see. Which strains? There's a few of them. I'll talk to you guys offline about that. But a really good high CBD, high THC sativa strain is called ACDC. Durban Poison is another one. I have a bunch. I'll share cannabis knowledge offline or with anybody, or I'll make a channel if you're interested in the group. Make a channel, I will. Okay. What I'm going to do right now, and this is a good idea, I'm going to make a, and I'm just going to call this channel Your Body, because there's a lot of implications of that. So that's what it will be. And you guys are all going to have to join it. Oh, wait a minute. Can I add everybody? On this version, I don't think there's a way to add everyone. Let's see. Yeah, no, I have to go through and add you guys individually one at a time, and I don't want to do that. So join the channel if you want. I will talk about that stuff there. Um, go ahead and make more comments or questions. Healthy living channel. Oh yeah, meditation, foods, it's all part of that. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's, again, guys, that's what this piece right here, that's what I call my pillars. You know, remember, this is the 3 pillars of the market structure. This is the pillars of Jeff. You know, if I'm not rested, I can function on and off, but I have to be mindful of that. Same thing with exercise. It's a different, my brain is different if I exercise regularly and in the right way at the right times, you know, with respect to this. But for every one of you, that's going to be different. Same thing with the right food. Simplicity is just a mentality for me. And expectations, you got to get that right. So David, this is your point right here. You got to understand you're going to be in this game for life, and you got to set your expectations correctly, like I did in the last session. You know, you're not going to trade for a living in your first year. It's just not going to happen, okay? Get that through your heads, guys. You know, it's time to process and meditate. You know, this one again is personal to me because I have so much energy. I have to periodically just tell myself to slow down. And you got to make it fun. You know, every now and then, you know, open up a Top Step combine for 150 grand and just go crazy. Do whatever you want. Just try stuff, trade stuff, make up setups, you know, take trades for no reason whatsoever. You know, you will learn a lot by doing that. That's the fun part of trading. Okay, let's see. I want to go back and read some of the comments. And yeah, this is a life skill. There's no question about it. Lee nailed that. Like playing, my nephew is a professional musician, and we compare notes all the time. There's no question. And you know, the other thing is, I don't look at it that way. Learn it well, and you always have an opportunity to make money. I think if you get skilled at this, making money is automatic. It really, I mean, I can be doing a webinar and talking to you guys and trading HMOMO and making money, and I don't even have to think about it. You know, and you will all get there. So anyway, alrighty. No other questions or comments. Cool. Hey, you know, your process. Remember what I said about process? It's a living document. Your process is a living document. It will change and you know, migrate and evolve. The vegan lifestyle. Yes, feel free to PM me about anything, guys. Just remember that the structure about how to contact me privately. Okay, use, you know, like the Slack PM or instant messaging in Facebook or Messenger if you want to just something quick, like, you know, hey, can you tell me one good strain for, you know, focus while you trade or whatever. But I want to come back to what Maria's talking about in a minute. You know, you say that all the time, the email doesn't seem to work. The email works fine. I don't respond to email necessarily right away because I'm assuming it's going to be a conversation. But that is my email right there at Gmail. And I do respond. I don't always do it right away, particularly if it's something that doesn't have to happen today. You know, like if you email a couple of you, I'm having conversations about mentoring you via email, and they've been going on for weeks, and I may not respond to the last thing you said for 10 days because I'm busy. You know, I'm doing this, and my back was healing, and whatever else. So, you know, but those are the ways to get in touch with me. You know, quick stuff if it's a yes or no, and you know, create a thread if you really want to have a conversation and do it in email. Okay, so yeah, vegan stuff. I would be very careful. Just Lee's comment. I know it's kind of a joke, but don't intermingle your personal dogma about the world. You know, like I'm pretty pessimistic about the prospects of the survival of the species, but you know, don't intermingle that with trading. That doesn't mean you can't make money on something. And at the same time, diet, you know, is really important from the perspective of, you know, if you're overweight, it will be hard to be a good trader if you have blood sugar problems. You know, the only thing I'll tell you about my solution to that, you know, Maria and everybody else, is I don't believe in diets of any kind, you know, the keto diet kind of thing. But a lot of my normal behavior, I fast all the time regularly. not on any schedule, just when I feel like right now I'm in the middle of, I'm on the 28th hour of a fast, and it makes me focused and it controls pain, and I love it. And it helps me lose weight if I need to. I don't, but I'm pretty fit and pretty low body mass, or a low body, whatever it is, the index thing, you know. But making that part of my trading was something that took me a long time to figure out. And for me, it's about what I eat around different times of the day. And for example, I'm not a vegan, although I'm not a big red meat eater, but there's times when I can tell I really need those aminos and whatnot. And, you know, there's other ways to get them, but, and I will find a direct impact. Not intermittent fasting. I fast, but I don't do it that same way. For me, it's much more extreme than that. Like, you know, I'll go 2 days and eat nothing whatsoever. And then I'll eat normally for 2 or 3 days, you know. And then every once a week, I'll eat whatever I want. You know, I'll go get a big chocolate cake and have a steak, or, you know, whatever. And I'm 5'10", weigh 160 pounds, and I'm very, very fit. Upper body strong. I raced, I lifted weights my whole life. But I also have a ton of injuries, so, you know, that impacts it. But, you know, your physical health will matter. You know, you cannot be a couch potato and be a good trader. I don't know any that do that. I know some that started that way and they learned to make their health a focus. And, you know, the way I do that is when I'm not teaching, what I do is I get up, I trade the open, then I leave and I go like to Whole Foods or to Lazy Acres, which is another organic market near here, farmer's market. And I have like one big giant meal. You know, salad with some protein in it and lots of different colors and different food groups. And then that's it. I eat one meal a day like that, and then I might not eat again for 12 hours. So that's my model. And it works really good, particularly for pain control and for focus. And that's one reason also, you know, that I don't use any indica strain cannabinoids or THC, because those will make your blood sugar drop and, you know, you get the munchies. And by the way, I know, again, for the Cannabis Channel people, I know all kinds of ways. For example, if you get dry mouth or you get paranoid, if you take ground fresh black pepper, there are terpenes in pepper that will stop those two effects, or those two negative side effects, dry mouth and paranoia. So, you know, again, getting the right balance of all different substances in your body to, you know, that work for you is what it's all about. I don't drink. I occasionally, you know, will sip wine or craft beer because I really love them, but my body just doesn't handle it well. You know, I used to drink occasionally when I was in college. I was in a fraternity and all that, but, you know, my body just doesn't like to do it. And, you know, the next day I don't feel very good and I get gout from it, you know. So you got to do what works for you, kids. All right. It is by far what you just said is absolutely correct, David. It is the most important thing to becoming a good trader. It has nothing to do with the setups or, you know, your process. You know, you got to take care of yourself first. Then number 2 is your process. Then number 3 is how you implement your playbook with respect to times of day and opportunities. That's what we did today. And then guess what? The only thing left, there's only one thing left for any of you going forward. You now know everything I know. You don't know all the details and all, but you know everything structurally that I know. The only thing left is this. If you do that and follow that method, you know, making your own adjustments to it, you know, I will share with you, I have done this, you know, teaching, mentoring, coaching, more so in the past. I haven't done as much recently, and recently it's been a few dozen, but over the last 20 years, it's about 1,000. And of those people, let me do the math real quick. A couple are dead, so I got to filter them out. All right. I would say 20 of them are successful full-time traders of one capacity or another. Either they trade their own retirement accounts, or they trade for a living, or they trade for a prop firm. So do the percentages there, guys. That's 0.2%. That's how many are actively doing it. How many had the right skills to do it, and if they had applied themselves, could have? Probably 100, probably about 10% in my guess. So, you know what? This is something I've also been asked, and I'm sure you'll appreciate it, everybody. I was asked by one of my mentors as I was discussing with him what to do next with this group and what I want to do next. He said, of the 55 in the group, how would you rate them in the way you just rated, the people I've coached, the 1,000 coached or taught? And here's how I would do it. Some of you have given me no way to evaluate you because you don't comment, you don't ask questions, you don't post. So I have no way of telling. And that's probably 15 of you. So again, in the last 2 weeks, if that's one of you, don't worry about the language barrier, just spit it out. I'll figure out what you mean, but get active. Start interacting with your classmates in Slack, because I just don't have any way to understand how well you're doing, other than, if you've told me. All right, so that's, maybe 15, 20 of you, which leaves, 35. Of those, I would say there are 15 that clearly could do this successfully for a living at any degree they want. And notice how there's 22 people in this group right now. So a lot of you are here, but not all of you. And my point is, I'm judging that again based on what I'm seeing them ask and the development of their own processes and what they post and the critical thinking that I see, exhibited by those people. And, and again, I've given you over and over again good examples, but, Maria, Anton, Lee, Steve, Darren, Fernando, Trader PD, also known as Pavel, you guys are effectively interacting, and there's others. Philippe, I'm leaving people out, and I get that. But my point is, if you're looking for people to model, and Bar is another one, you guys are all, those are the people that are doing this right, and they're learning, and I can see them learning, and, that's how this should function. Okay. All right, everybody. How can you improve your critical thinking? Practice. Read the book Thinking in Bets. Are you familiar with that book? It's one of the ones I've mentioned before by Annie. Sorry, I have arthritis, and so in the mornings it's hard for me to type fast. Let's see. Oh, shit. There we go, this book right here. Okay. Yes, thank you, Trader PD. That's a really good way to kind of learn some critical thinking. Another book that I would recommend is this one, The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. Excellent book that's very, very apropos trading. Another one is anything... let's see. This guy actually has, this is another good book by the same author, The Anti-Fragile. And the two books that I mentioned before, Blink is a good one by Malcolm Gladwell. The Power of Thinking Without Thinking, also a good way to learn some critical thinking skills. And then he has another book that's really good that's called, where is it? No. Let me just grab his. Outliers is another good one, and The Tipping Point. That's the one I was trying to remember. This is a really good book about how little tiny things can make big changes. Yeah, Freakonomics is another good one Lee mentioned. There's a bunch of them in this category, but the ones that I mentioned, I would definitely start there. Black Swan certainly, and some of the others back here. Annie has a new book too. I forget what it's called, but it's along the same lines. I think it might be How to Decide. Is this the one? I think it is. It's literally just coming. No, yeah, that's it. That's coming out in September of next year. And anything, Linda Ratsky has a new book that's really cool, and the first 3 chapters are free on her website. So, yeah, and many of these are on audiobooks, and they're good for audiobooks because they're not the kind of thing you need to sit down and actually study, Maria. You can just throw them on while you're in the car or changing diapers or doing laundry or whatever, So, okay, other questions or comments? Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up here. Yeah, The Flow is excellent. The Flow is really a good book, and I've mentioned that one in the past. I put that one up in the Slack as well by the guy with the unpronounceable name. But that is a really excellent book. Mihaly, yeah, that's a tough name, but a great book, great little paperback, also available, on audio and whatnot. And it's just about, it's about that same thing that Trading in the Zone talks about, but it just talks about it in general life examples. All righty. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap it up unless anybody has a burning desire or last minute question they absolutely have to hear. And thank you, Darren. Thank you, everybody else. I will post the recording when it's available. And I will post another class. There's none posted right now, but there's more coming. Have a good one. I'll see you guys for the reopen and whatnot.